I'm Cynthia Fisher of Big Bang Mosaics, and I'm going to be doing a demonstration of the indirect method, and that is how I choose to do 99% of my mosaics. So, starting out, you always add the dry ingredients to the wet, and I have calculated that a cup of water gives 3 square feet of coverage for the thinset when it's all mixed up. I measured my piece here, and it's about 5.5, 6 feet, and so I'm going to mix up about 6 feet worth of thinset, because you always want to have more than enough rather than running out. So again, I start out with the water, and then I'll mix my thinset into it. And one could use an electric mixer, but for this small of a project, I'm happy to just use my trowel here. It's got a special name, and I don't remember what it is. An edging trowel, maybe? Something like that. But so start mixing it up. Take a look in the bucket. And it's really important that you get the mixture to the right thickness, because when it's too thin, and it's much easier to make it too thin than it is to make it too thick, what happens is you pull the trowel over the thinset, and if the mixture is too soupy, the notched part, everything sinks down, and then you really don't have enough thinset down, and it's misleading. So again, important to make sure that it's thick enough. I usually like to go by comparing it to good quality peanut butter. So it should be really pretty thick. So now we're getting to about the right consistency. Ideally you stir it, according to the bag, for about 5 minutes. But again, on your ratios, the bag only tells you how to mix the entire bag, so you just have to get a mixture that works for you and does the job that you want it to do. Thinset's a great material in that it has the holding power so that even if you mix it too thin, it will almost always still do the job, but it's just harder to control and better to have it be a little thicker. So, I'm thinking that's good. So now what has to happen always with thinset like this is you have to let it slake. And that means you let it sit for 5 to 10 minutes, totally leave it alone, and then do another step. The next step is to remove the mosaic from the panel that it's going to be attached to, because that's where we have to put the thinset. So this mosaic is laid on sticky mesh, and underneath the sticky mesh was my drawing. So right now I need to loosen the tape around the edges and get the drawing out of there. So I do that with a knife, just carefully taking the tape off. So there's like another piece that I'll cut off. And I go around the whole mosaic and do that. I'll do one more. I'm getting ready to put the sticky paper on the top, and this is just so it's easier to move, and it's really, really important to make sure that you don't have any little bitty pieces of glass that are sitting on top of your mosaic, and a good way to look for that is to come down and eyeball it from the side and see if something is sitting on top, or just making sure that everything really is flat. And for instance, like right here, it's teeny, but it's a little bitty shard of glass that would get in the way of the sticky paper sticking well. Not a big deal if you forget to do it, but it is a good thing to check for. Okay, now if I can have my assistant come over here, please. We're going to spread the frosty contact paper. It's very important that you use frosty contact paper. It has more tack to it than the clear or transparent. So since I have a helper here, you can roll the sticky paper out, but you can also have your assistant hold that half. We're going to go right to the bottom, and actually let's have it go on the angle of this side. Yeah, so have your end go all the way to the bottom. Is it down there? Mm-hmm. Okay, and you just let it drop, and I'm just going to slide the whole roll up. And then cut it off at the top. Okay, and then we're going to push it down really well. And meanwhile, we'll use our angle well. Do the same thing and overlap it sideways. And when you have to overlap the sticky paper, it's really good to give it a generous overlap so that it doesn't pull apart when you go to lift it. So it's also really important that you separate the back of the mesh from the sketch because over time the sticky mesh, I'm just using a regular ruler to slide in between the paper. The sticky mesh, the back side of it picks up some stick also, so this just makes this job really easy. Oops. Okay, so now we can pick up, and don't take the paper. If you want to pick up run your fingers under the mesh, and the paper might want to stick to it, but we'll do our best to lift the thing, and we're going to put it over there on the side. And I'm going to grab it like this here. Hold it with your thumbs. Yeah, grip it. Okay, ready? Stiff. Keep it stiffer. It's okay. Because we can just yank it out. Okay. So our thin set has been sitting here slaking for 5 to 10 minutes. Doesn't matter if it sits longer than that, but you should give it a good 5 minutes. And then you always want to re-stir it. And then start spreading it. Okay, so start out by warming it on. The first thing that you do is you use one of the straight sides of the trowel. There's two notch sides and 2 flat sides. The first thing is to put a paper thin layer with one of the straight sides, the flat sides of the trowel. And that's just to start the bond, letting the bond get a good attachment to the substrate. My substrate in this case is 1/4 inch Hardybacker, which is one of my favorite substrates to use for mosaics because it's inexpensive and relatively lightweight, and it's great for interior installations, and that's what this is. So again, I'm just doing the initial establishing the bond between the thin set and the panel. Not worried about the depth at this point, just want to get that skin on. Oops. Okay, so now that we did that, now the next step is to get the bed of the thin set. You want it to be the right thickness. And the way we figure what the right thickness is, the glass that I'm using is 1/8 of an inch thick, and that's why I use the trowel that is 3/16. That's a 3/16 inch trowel. Okay, so now you want to use the notch side, and you're letting the trowel kind of run across. I'm holding the trowel at a 45-degree angle. That's really important. And I really like to stress on this step that using a trowel is a skill, And like any skill, you have to do it a lot to get good at it. So tile setters that do this every day are great at getting a really consistent thinset bed. I have been doing this close to 20 years, and my beds are relatively smooth, but it's still something that I never take for granted that I'm going to get it spot on perfect each time. So a way of ensuring that you do put down the right amount of thinset is to use a sample piece tile, stick it down to test your depth. So what that means is I have a little piece of tile here, and I'm going to put it around several places, push it down. So basically what that tells me is that if I leave this amount of thinset, I have too much, because the thinset right now is coming up the sides of the piece of glass. So I like to do that in several places. Ideally, the thinset comes about halfway up, so it's still kind of thick. That one might be getting a little better, but it's also important that you clean your tile off each time. So actually I'm going to use a new piece. But first I'm going to take off some of my thinset because I have too much. So now I always like to make sure my edges have a little bit extra, because if there's too much on the edges, the extra will just get squeezed out and not be an issue. But your edge tiles are always your most vulnerable, and so good to protect them with a little bit of extra thinset. Now I'm going to test the depth again. I went around and removed some of the excess thinset, and so I want to just check. That's better. It's coming like halfway up the sides of the tile. And I always do it in more than one place because it's getting it consistent. It's a little thick there. I might take some up in that section. And let's just see down here. That looks good. And I try not to have this step stretch out too long, because you could just kind of keep doing it and keep doing it. So I'm going to go over it one more time with my trowel. And just so you know, this is the amount I pulled up. It's really good to check in with what's on the bottom side of your trowel. Otherwise, you're just guessing at if you're putting it down or taking it up. So that time I took a little more. Okay, so now we're ready to put the mosaic on top. Okay, so let's pick it up. And let me pull it up toward me. Okay, and I'm going to place it down. How's yours look for balanced? Okay, so for now, we'll just push it all down. And while the sticky paper is still on, I go around and try and make sure I really push every single piece. I don't mind that there's excess thinset coming up, because that means none of these tiles will ever fall out. It's important that you clean up the excess with a sponge, which I'll be showing you, before it becomes hard. And since this is frosty contact paper, it comes off really easily. So basically you go around the whole thing, pushing the tiles down. And it's okay to dislodge the thinset. The reason that I had to use white thinset in this piece is there's a lot of transparent stained glass that if you put semi-transparent stained glass over gray thinset, it totally changes the color of the pieces of glass and makes it much duller. If it weren't for that, I would use gray thinset to match the ultimate grout choice. So we will finish this up, but just to give you a sense, I'm going to finish up this corner up here. And just to show, I can start pulling this sticky paper, and I do remove it right away, like that. So now I'm finishing up pressing everything down, I did the whole panel, pretty much. You can just do this endlessly and keep finding more places where it will mush up. But it's done enough. So back to removing the sticky paper. Again, it's really important that I get it off as soon as possible, which is now. But the thin set is stronger already than my sticky paper. And that's in contrast to when you use tile tape. Tile tape is so strong that you can't remove it until the thin set is well along the road to being completely set. And since I use so much thin set, I need to wipe it off before it gets to that point. Different people do this differently, but this is the method that works for me. So that's what happens if a piece hasn't gotten pushed down or there's not enough, but it always sticks to the paper and you can just drop it back down in. So again, so in this case, I'm going to put a little bit more thin set on the tile, and it's the fact that it stays to the stuck to the paper really helps you out, because if for some reason, if you had a whole clump of them that stayed on the paper, you just drop it back down. You don't never take them off, you just let them go back in place by dropping it back down, and it's really easy to do. So now I have my sponge here, and I'm going to go back and just carefully dab out the excess thin set, because I absolutely, as I said earlier, do not want white. I'm not going to use white grout, I'm going to use shades of gray, so I have to make a space for the grout to go into, and it's just a dabbing motion at the surface of the tiles. And so I'll go over the whole mosaic like this, and then once it's all cleaned up, I let it sit, and once the thin set is hardened, I'll go in and grout. Sometimes it's less than 24 hours, it depends on the temperature in the room and the humidity conditions or whatnot. So I'm finishing up wiping down the mosaic. There's plenty of space for the grout to find a home, and that's the next step. So unfortunately that's not going to happen now, but if you want to check in on the project, I'll be installing it in Lauderhill, Florida in early May, and after that I might even have some installation pictures, but also pictures of the mosaic up on the wall. Thanks for watching.